My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Aaron Coe. It's June 26, 2023. We're at the Nicholson Library at Linfield University in McMinnville. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
The first question to get things rolling is why wine?
Well, let's see. That is quite a story. It really kind of started off, I guess, back in the 90s. I was very interested in I had friends and family, a lot of family members actually, that were involved in the restaurant business. So I just I grew up in, so this is even before the 90s. This goes back until I started actually in the back of the house washing dishes in 1986 for $3.50 an hour. And that was the minimum wage back then. Luckily, it was at a ski resort, so I was able to ski for free. So that was a good benefit. That just kind of led to, I did that as I was very young. I was only like 15 at the time, and then I decided I was going to perhaps I had some family members that were in the military and they flew and they're pilots, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll go that route. So I thought about that. But then just some things took place, during high school that just kind of made me realize I didn't really want to do that. So I kind of fell back into the restaurant business, just feeling like that was just like a comfort, like a security blanket for me. And so, I worked at several restaurants for a long time, and it wasn't really, as far as like the wine thing, it kind of, before I got into fine dining, it was a bottle of Domaine Duren that completely changed my life, and altered the course of who I am and what I've become today. I was just at a restaurant, and this was in Boise, Idaho, which is my hometown, and so I was out to dinner and on a date, and I was very excited about, so I wanted to kind of impress this date. And I got what was a pretty expensive bottle of wine at the time for me, and then I tried it, and it was just like ethereal. It was like this magic moment of like, wow, I'd never had anything like that before. I'd never had wine like that before. So it kind of just opened up my whole universe, and it just made me start to think like, well, what is this? What's really going on? And that led me into working into fine dining. And so I just kind of worked my way up the ranks and worked at some really high-end places. One of them being a place called Desert Sage in Boise, Idaho. And it was extraordinary. I helped them open up the restaurant in December of 1996. And I was the head captain there for 5 years prior to moving here. But anyway, I just I learned more. I cut my teeth kind of at that restaurant, learning a lot about wine. And then, if I could, I guess, I think the catalyst, originally I was going to move here because I wanted to go to art school. And so my girlfriend at the time was a photographer, and I paint. And so we were going to go to PNCA together, but 9/11 happened at that exact moment, and I ended up getting a job at a restaurant in Portland called Genoa, and it was a pretty well-known restaurant, and so I was very fortunate to have arrived there, and that was just a really interesting series of events that led to that. But I ended up just starting off, just kind of a basic server there. I ended up working there for 7 years and ran the wine program at Genoa for the last 2 years of that. So that took me to Italy, and that first trip to Italy really changed my life. At that point, I realized maybe it was time to take a break from the restaurant business and maybe pursue some career in wine, start to sort of gravitate towards that a little bit more. And so that's what I did. I came back from my trip. I spent a month by myself in Italy, and basically just traveled from winery to winery to winery, from all the way from Piedmont until I finally got to Rome, and then just flew out of Rome. and that was pretty epic. So I decided, I got back to the restaurant, and everyone was just, assumed that I was just going to continue to stay there and be the somm there and blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to move more, get deeper into the wine world. But I started, before I left the restaurant, I was fortunate enough to meet this gentleman that he was actually a server that I worked with. His name was John Adam. And John was like a server at a really famous restaurant in Portland called Café des Amis. Back in the day, he was a server there for like 14 years. But he was really good friends with a woman named Joan Erath. And so he said, Joan has this husband, Dick, and he's a winemaker, and was wondering if maybe you'd be interested in going and checking out his facility and helping out with Crush one of the years. So that was 2001, and that was my very first introduction that I ever stepped foot onto a winery. And so that was just completely mind-blowing. So some of the first things I ever learned about winemaking, I didn't realize who he was. I had learned about Domaine Drouhin because of my previous experience, of course, with the wine. And I'd done some basic, reading about wine production, but I'd never, ever had gleaned like from what was a wine god. And just, he was amazing. And so some of my very first things I ever learned about winemaking was from Dick. The first year that I did that, so it was all my time that I had off at the restaurant during harvest, during Crush, I would just go straight out and work at the winery. So I did that the first year just for free lunch and a few bottles of wine. And then the next 3 years they paid me, and that's when I really started to get into production. So I never went to wine school. I thought about taking some classes, but I just learned in the trenches, and just learned from different winemakers. So that was very formative for me, and I learned a lot from that. And so now I can fast forward a little bit to my time when I'm getting ready to leave the restaurant. So my decision was at the time to work for my favorite distributor that I was buying wine from, which was an outfit called Casa Bruno. And Casa Bruno, they're both importer and distributor of Italian wines, and they have a very substantial Willamette Valley book as well. So that's how, from working with them, I did that for 8 years, and that's how I got to meet people like Andrew Rich with Carlton Winemaker Studio. That's how I got to meet Jerry Sass and to meet Bill Holleran and John Paul with Cameron, and it was really great to just learn about all these people, and it was exciting to go down a new path, to be in distribution and get out of the restaurant biz. But so after doing that for many years, I became pretty good friends with one of the producers I spoke of earlier, Bill Holleran. He, at the time, had a winery up on Stafford Hill, and so his winemaker, his very first winemaker was actually Jay Sommers. So Jay was his winemaker. That's how Jay was introduced into the Valley before he started his J. Christopher label, was the winemaker with Holleran. And so his assistant was named Mark Lagasse. And Mark, that's who I've learned the most about winemaking from. He was really fantastic, and I gleaned as much information as I could from him. And he taught me about, he held my hand, taught me oh no, you shouldn't probably do that, or that's way too much sulfur, and things like that. So there's little things that he just made sure I didn't screw it up too bad, and so I learned more and more. So then I decided to go ahead and pull the trigger, do my very first vintage in 2010. And also because I was working with Casa Bruno, there was a gentleman who he had cavatappi wine. I don't know if you're familiar with cavatappi, but we were selling his wine. And so I called him up and I said, do you think there's any way, I knew that he was buying fruit from, he was buying fruit out in Columbia Valley, and it was a pretty well-known vineyard. And so I asked him, do you think that there's any possibility I might be able to get a couple of tons? And it was, so the grower was Dick Boucher, and he ended up being, he's one of the very, well-known growers out in Washington. And it's relatively difficult to get his fruit, but because of my connection with cavatappi, I was from selling his wine, I was able to get some. So that started it, and my first vintage was, I also sold a wine called Domaine Pouillon, and that was in the book as well. And so Alexis Pouillon and his wife Juliette, they were gracious enough to let me use their facility. I gave them free labor, and in exchange for letting me use their equipment. And so it wasn't even really like a custom crush situation. I just was able to, they just kind of let me in the door. So that was fun. And I just made 6 barrels. That was my very first. And I decided that, I mean, my love is Nebbiolo. I really, really love Nebbiolo. Piedmont was amazing to me. Like, there will be a little part of my heart in Piedmont forever. But it's really, really difficult to find varietally correct Nebbiolo in the States, I think. But you can find pretty good Sangiovese. And so that's why I thought maybe I'll try my hand at Sangiovese. So that's, of course, the grape they used to make Chianti in Tuscany. And so I got enough to make 6 barrels of Sangiovese from Dick Boucher's vineyard. And that's how it all started. And they're out in Lisle. I don't know if you know Domaine Pouillon's. So out by kind of Coe Cellars in that area. Yeah, so they're up in the hills there in Lisle, Washington. So I was, I was making the trip back and forth, to punch down every day and whatnot. And but it was pretty fun. It was a great experience, and I knew that I was hooked for sure. So that was 2010. Pretty light vintage. I remember my alcohol was only 12.2, which is extraordinarily low. It's pretty low for Washington fruit. So yeah, it was very light. But I then decided, because of my connection and friendship with Mark Lagasse, that I would go back to. I didn't want to. Basically, it just came down to not wanting to drive all the way out to Lisle every day and back. And so since they're in Stafford Hill and West Lynn, that was a lot easier of a drive. So I approached Bill Holleran and my friend Mark and said, do you think that I can make a little bit of wine with you guys if I, gave you free labor? Try to pitch the same idea. And they went for it. And so I made wine with them until 2016. And that was very formative for me. And I got myself up to, I'm still not making a ton. I'm still only producing about 500 cases. But now I'm making 15, 16 barrels. And let's see. I started getting a little bit of recognition with it in 2012. I entered it into Oregon Northwest Food and Wine Festival and won gold with my wine. And so that was great, and that kind of started it got me on the radar a little bit, and then 13 was pretty good, and then people started noticing, and so I was starting to get it out into places, and I was selling into restaurants, and then places like Blue Hour were picking it up, and Blue Hour did it by the glass for like almost 3 years, so I was just starting to get some attention. Which was really great, but I think it wasn't until just recently with the article with Michael Alberti that we sat down and he checked out the wine and was like, you're doing something pretty cool here and kind of old school. And old school is that's the thing. Like I'm since I I lost my source with Dick Boucher in 2017. He ended up selling to larger contracts. So the smaller guys that were all making between 300 and 500 cases a year got kicked out. But his fruit was amazing, and I missed it. But I was really lucky to stumble upon a grower in Walla Walla, and his name is Dan Thiessen, and he has a place called Wagon Wrench Farms, and he's also a chef. He actually runs, not only does he run that farm and grow all that fruit on his property, but he's also the executive chef of the Walla Walla Steak Company. Very talented guy. I got my very first fruit from him. It just happened to be, I mean, I was looking online, like, where can I find some new fruit? And I just happened to stumble on him, and I said, do you think I can get such and such tons this year? And he said yes, and that's how it all started. And then Holleran had moved out to Dundee, and so that was a little bit far for me to travel, and I decided to try to. I had a friend of mine in town in Portland, and he was considering maybe doing some kind of an urban situation, not too different from like the Southeast Wine Collective. And so the name of his wine is Adega Northwest, and he's Portuguese, and he makes like Portuguese style stuff. And so he opened up a little place on like 17th and McLaughlin called Adega Northwest, and brought in 5 other winemakers, and so we almost kind of created our own little, Carlton winemaker studio, if you will, but in an urban environment. So we've been doing that since 2018. It's over by the Iron Fireman Collective Building, and we actually have a tasting room going now, which is cool on just the weekends, but. It's tough with not really having a lot for the marketing and the advertising of it yet, but we're just like slowly getting there. But this is the year that I've really decided. I think the catalyst for this decision was perhaps Michael Alberti's our friendship and knowing him and selling him wine to the Storyteller back in the day. But just the fact that he wrote what he did and put my name out there. I mean, it completely evaporated my 2019 vintage instantly. And so I was like, yeah, I think I do want to try to make a go of it full time. So in order to do that, I'm keenly aware that that's going to require like doubling my production. So that's the goal this year. So I've kind of always had it like, working at Genoa for all those years, working in Casa Bruno for all those years, rubbing elbows with John Paul and Dick Erath and all these people. It's still kind of just been a bit of a hobby though, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to keep perfecting it and keep getting better at it and keep learning and just. And I think some of my experiences, I'd gone back to Italy several more times. Throughout the years because of my connections with working with Casa Bruno, and so I would just ask like winemakers and people I became friends with in Tuscany and in Umbria and just say, what do you do? Like how do you get it old world? What is old world? And I realized fundamentally there's a huge amount of like terroir involved, obviously. But there's also technique. There's also about what these people are doing in the vineyard and what they do with the fruit. So I basically try my best, even using Walla Walla fruit, to do exactly the same things that they're doing, to try to make something more older world. And so it's kind of fun to like sometimes brown bag my wine and hang out with a couple Somm friends of mine and have them taste it and have them think for sure that it's from Italy when it's actually Washington fruit made in Oregon. And so that's kind of fun.
Covered a lot there. So I'm going to go back and ask some questions I'm going to go back a little ways. So
sure.
Tell me about, you mentioned the Domaine Drouhin bottle that kind of opened your eyes to wine. So from that point, tell me about starting to learn wine and your own kind of personal wine education. How did you go about developing a palate and developing an understanding of sort of the world of wine?
I asked the owner of the restaurant that I worked at if I could be involved in the tastings. I just figured that the best thing to do would just be immerse myself into going to different distributors' tastings, opening up bottles at the restaurant and tasting stuff, and just trying to build like a database, like a kind of a mental Rolodex, if you will. And I was pretty inexperienced that way back then. And so, you just slowly kind of by tasting this and like, well, this is a little this way, this is a little that way, you can kind of eventually feel like you can grasp it enough to connect the dots. But it takes a long time. It takes a long time of reading and tasting, and that's. I think it's just immersing myself into it.
Tell me about your fine dining experience a little bit, and especially as you got into the wine part of it. First of all, sort of developing sort of the wine and food pairing idea. Tell me about sort of coming to understanding of that, and then progressing into actually running a wine list. What were the steps along the way for you?
Well, I was fortunate enough just to get a job there because it's, everyone's worked there at Genoa at that time for 20 plus years. And so there was almost never an opening there. Someone literally had to die. But I got lucky enough to get my foot in the door. And so a gentleman that was running the wine program at the time, his name was Michael Autry, and he is actually David Autry's younger brother, and David makes Westry wines, and I know that him and his wife are very involved in IPNC, and so that's how I started to again to want to taste everything and show up at tastings. And Michael was pretty cool. He would have pre-shift meetings once in a while when he'd crack a couple bottles of wine, and we would just talk about them and discuss it and analyze it and just kind of pick it apart and see what people thought, and that helped my palate develop. And then as I kind of grew more comfortable into working into that space, the famous chef, Kathy Wims, at that point, she and the old owner, Carrie Debuse, they decided to part ways. She went on to open up Nostrana and her entire empire, but Genoa stayed open for a while, for another 8 years. But I stayed on there as well, and so I think I just kind of wanted to learn as much as I could, go to lots of people's tastings, and then I kind of became friends with the new wine buyer, and I offered my assistance. I said, "Do you think I could help you out? I'll do anything you want me to do, and I'll haul boxes of wine around and help you organize the cellar and do whatever it takes." And that was just on my own time for free. I just volunteered so that I could learn. And then when he decided to move on, I guess the owner, Carrie, thought that it was a no-brainer for me to just take it over. I still stayed one of the main captains, but also took on the responsibility of running the wine. And
what did that entail for you? What did you have to know to take over that role?
Well, it meant, I was pretty green, really. This is the first time I'd ever run a wine program, and it was Genoa, so it was kind of a big deal. They had a huge inventory. Really, really old vintages of Produttoris and all kinds of things down in the cellar. It was just like a candy store. It was just, it was so much fun to just be down there. But I would have a lot of, it was really the effort from a lot of reps from different distributors that really cut my teeth, specifically Chris Davis. He was one of the best, is still one of the best wine professionals that I know, and he left Casa Bruno and started helped start a distribution company called Estelle, And so Estelle's become very well known now. But yeah, he was great. I learned a lot from him. A gentleman named Todd Bacon, he's been in the business forever, was with Young's for a long, long, long time. I guess they're now RNDC. He was really fabulous. He's probably forgotten more about Italian wine than I know about Italian wine. I know quite a bit about it. He's very, very knowledgeable. So I learned a lot from him and guys like that. And a couple of it was that and just going to a huge amount of tastings and just learning and just research and just constant knowledge. And I just became a sponge and just tried to soak up as much as I could. And that, I think, really ultimately helped me to become a better winemaker as well, once I kind of learned what it was that I wanted to do.
Before we get to that, I am curious about, you took over, as you said, a well-established and a well-known wine program. Was that more of a challenge, do you think, than building one from scratch? Was it more daunting to take one over? And what kind of stamp did you put on it while you were there?
That's a good question. I think in some ways it was a little easier to already have it done. I think like a bulk of the really hard stuff had blood, sweat, and tears had already been kind of put into it for 40 years. So it was kind of nice to just be handed the keys to the mansion. And then I just got to, walk around and admire what everyone had done. But then there were some things that I thought, newer things that were coming along, that it was really great to have all the old guard and have all the, usual suspects. But I wanted to have some different things from Sardinia, and some interesting things from Puglia that I hadn't seen there, and some different smaller production mom and pop places out of Piedmont that were becoming up like pretty well known, or at least getting some attention, but they didn't have a spot on the list. And so it was kind of fun to put those in and just taste through different people's portfolios and make the decision to, in some ways, kind of sculpt it a little teeny bit towards what I wanted it to look like, with at the same time honoring its tradition and honoring all of the amazing people that had became engaged in celebrated birthdays and had anniversaries, and all the people that have come to love what Genoa, what it stood for. So it was an interesting kind of dichotomy of honoring the old world and trying to also at the same time put my stamp on it.
So you talked about Casa Bruno a little bit. Again, you obviously you developed quite a bit of knowledge at that point of the wine, of Italian wine, especially. What was that transition like, getting into distribution, and what was what were the most enjoyable parts of the kind of the early years in distribution?
Yeah, I really loved. Well, first of all, their book was amazing, so it was really fun to just get to learn it really intimately. But I just really loved going around to different accounts and building relationships with people. There's so much wine out there that people are making, and there's so many different wineries, and there's just it's such a relationship-driven business. And so it was really fun to become really close to a lot of these accounts I had. And I had a really big territory too. I had like a bunch of Portland. I once in a while I had to go down even to Corvallis in Albany, and then I would also once in a while go out to Hood River, but mostly I had the coast. So even though I lived in Portland, I had from Astoria to Newport. So I drove like 3,500 miles a month or something like that. So yeah, I drove a ton. Yeah, a lot of windshield time, and but I just became really, really close with a lot of people, and it was fun to coming from the restaurant business and so many years in fine dining, and also running that wine program. It was fun to kind of see people in that journey and watch that evolution for them, and help sculpt that evolution for them. And be like, hey, I think maybe you're missing this, and let's throw this in here. And so that was a lot of fun, and the camaraderie, and just these people I still am really good friends with. We still go out to dinner. We go travel places, do things together. I'm still really close to a lot of those people, which works out great for me now that I'm making my own wine, because now I've got guaranteed buyers. I can go into those same places and they're just like, oh yeah, we love your wine, we'll do it.
What was the biggest learning curve for distribution? Obviously, you'd seen it from the other side, but being on the distribution side, what was the biggest learning curve for you?
Probably just learning enough about the wines to talk about them with, accuracy and knowledge and depth, and I think being lucky enough to go to Italy several more times, and throughout the years just to have boots on the ground and just to learn about it. I just wanted that's what it really was. The first couple years was just completely diving into just knowing as much as I could about them, and the trips really helped a lot. And so then when I could go walk into an account, they trusted me. They trusted the fact that I had been there, and that I had personal stories about being in the vineyards and being with the winemakers, and it gave people confidence that they're happy to bring those wines in, and that they were going to do well.
You mentioned stories there, and I think that's such an interesting part of sort of the wine sales side is the stories. So tell me what stories you found attracted you to a wine, and what stories you found sold wine well.
Sometimes it would be family related. It would be, maybe how a family worked so hard for so many generations in the just cultivating it and building this amazing vineyard. Sometimes it could be, sometimes it was just people's enthusiasm about the wines, but a lot of it was actually being able to travel to those places and spend time with them and get to learn like what they loved about their wine. And everywhere you go in Italy, it's always like, we have the best food, we have the best wine. Each place, they're very territorial, but the whole place is magical, and so it's really fun to learn where each person's different perspective, and then I could kind of relate that to a person's wine list and see where there's holes that they could, might be missing, that might be a good fit for them, and then share stories about. Like for instance, there's a really fabulous producer. Her name is Bruna Grimaldi. She's in Serralunga d'Alba, which is in between Alba and Barolo. And one year, I can't remember which trip it was, but one year they'd scheduled a tasting and a lunch for me, and her 80-year-old mother had got up really early to make this special lunch for us, and it's a dish called agnolotti, and there's just roll out pasta, and you take some meats and some vegetables and you puree them, and then you pipe them into these tiny little pieces that you roll up. They're tiny little like miniature ravioli, right? And it's traditionally served in the brodo, which is like half chicken stock and half beef stock. So it's just like pasta floating in this broth dusted with Parmesan Reggiano. And she had made, and it's probably to this day probably the best pasta that I've ever eaten. And to be like made by this little 80-year-old woman, just for me that day, was a very, very, very special time. That was something that'll always be with me. Yeah. So so when I'm telling, buyers at restaurants, like stories like that, it's just endearing, and it's just really, it's beautiful, and I don't have to. I never had to feel like I had to like fake anything, or I could just be like true and honest and just give real information and be like I don't know, just built. I think it built trust with people, and trust is everything when building relationships with accounts. So
Flip over to the production side a little bit now. You talked about your first production and just sort of randomly showing up at Dickie Rath's winery, which is it's a pretty great way to start. Tell me about your first impressions of the work of wine production. What your first harvest was like.
Well, I mean, I'd never done anything like that before, so it was really exciting to see, like, everybody on the line, everybody just picking out leaves and picking out sticks, and I'm just like, this is exciting, and it sounds like years and years later, I'm like, oh, we got to process this fruit. But it's still fun. There's still something cool about it, just because it's yours, it's your baby, this is your, I want to make sure that everything is clean and I'm trying to make the best wine that I can, and so I want it to be perfect and look good. But that first time, I had this overwhelming, like, after we were finished, they would go down and get us burgers at Lumpy's or something. Right down the street on the main strip through Dundee or whatever it was, pizza, and I don't know. It was just it was a lot of work, and that first year wasn't, like I said, it wasn't paid. They'd give us some free wine, which I still have a few bottles of those. I've got some O2 Leland and O2 Prince Hill from Erath, which is pretty awesome. But I just had this like feeling like I'd really did something. Like I really accomplished. I had my hands are dirty. I was tired. My back hurt, but I felt awesome. I just felt like I'd really done something that was going to come to fruition in a couple of years, and was going to become this beautiful bottle that was made with such collective effort and hard work and passion and joy. And I still find it, to this day, exhilarating. I mean, it's hard work. It's really funny when you get into it, and I'll have friends like volunteer, or they'll come in, or friends of friends will come in, and they're like, "This is hard." And I was like, "Yeah, you put in a lot of work. Like, it's a very compacted, super hard, like, month and a half of not a lot of sleep. It's like having a baby once a year. You don't sleep at all for the first month and a half, and you just work really, really hard, and yeah. But it's really, really worth it.
Obviously, by the time you were starting to work into production and starting to think about your own label, you had an idea in mind of what kind of wine you wanted to make. So tell me about the steps along the way in production, all your different mentors of figuring out how you would make the wine you wanted to make, how you would go about creating this wine that you had in your mind.
Well, as I conceptualized, the idea of actually making it, I think it kind of was, I knew for sure that I wanted to make it something old world. I know everyone talks about, I want a sense of place, and I get that, and I mean, that's especially so important in Oregon. I love being able to taste a Pinot Noir from Chehalem Mountains, or taste a Pinot Noir that I know is Red Hills, or be able to taste something that without doubt is Eole Amity. Like, that's really truly the beauty of terroir, and I think a sense of place is extremely important. It really is. Where I get the fruit, though, and I mean, Walla Walla is typically known for being relatively big and heavy and higher alcohol and concentrated profiles and a lot of phenolics and just a big wines. But I didn't really want to do that. So I think that, loving Italian wine so much, I just decided I really, really I really want to try my goal and my mantra, and it still is to take New World fruit and make as Old World wine as I can. And I think that came from my years at Genoa and my years working with different winemakers, and my years with Casa Bruno, and just falling in love with that style, falling in love with that profile. Barbaresco is probably to this day, I think, my favorite wine in the world. They say that all palates lead to Burgundy, and maybe that's true, but I'm still kind of stuck in Italy. But I don't know. I love it. The main one. I think what really did it was my 2010 trip to Tuscany and Umbria, and I went and visited a producer that we sold in the book at Casa Bruno, and they still sell it. It's called Felsina, and Felsina is one of the most extraordinary wineries in all of Italy. They've actually won Winery of the Year in Italy, so if you imagine how many wineries are there, that's kind of a big deal. The award is Tre Bicchieri, and means 3 glasses, and they have more. The only other person that has more 3-glass awards over all these years is Gaia. Felsina is second. And so they're about 15 kilometers east of Siena. So if you look at Florence here and Siena's here, this whole area is the Chianti Classico. So that gets the Black Rooster, the Gallo Nero, and then this side's the Colle Senese. So that's those two main parts of Chiantis. Several different Chianti zones, but those are really the 2 main. And they're the very, very southern tip of that, as far as you can go south and still get the Black Rooster. And so I visited them, and their wines were just it was I told Michael Alberti, it's just if cherries had the ability to rust, it was just that was the nose, and it was just so insane and powerful and dense. So I wanted to really try to come as close as I could to recreate that. So it's it took years to try to figure out how they did it, and I had to ask a lot of questions. And I even remember a subsequent visit a couple years after that. They've got a really, really old part of the cellar which dates to the 1500s, and the smell is insane. You can go in there and it just all the years of the wine and wine on the floor and bottles breaking and everything, just this, you can smell the mother. You can smell that's why they don't inoculate their wine, because they don't have to, because it has a mother living there. And I was actually going behind the barrels, trying to scratch my fingers on the walls, trying to get some of the yeast or something. I don't know if it worked, but anyway, I put it in a bag and I brought it home. I don't know, but I tried. But yeah, they were amazing. They were the ones that really made me decide that's what I want to do. I'm gonna make the best Sangiovese that I can. And I just love the grape. Sangiovese is one of the few grapes in the world that has the ability to be feminine and masculine at the same time. There's a backbone to it. There's major structure and tannin to it, but there's also an elegance and a brightness and kind of a lifted component to it, which makes it such an amazing grape. And they loved it. They've been growing that grape since before the Romans. The Etruscans grew it. It means the blood of Jupiter. So Sangio, blood, and Vese, Hove, Jovian, Jove. So it's they love it so much they named it after the blood of their god. So that's got to be something there.
Big shoes to fill to clear that bar. Tell me about learning to work with it after, I assume, much of your experience, harvest experience would have been with Pinot, obviously very different beast. So tell me about learning to work with Sangiovese.
So when you're trying to get fruit out of the vineyard, you're always looking for you're really wanting everything to kind of come together at the same time. That's the magic moment, right? That's when you want to, okay, let's do it, let's pick it, let's get it in, let's process it, and let's crush it. And so to do that, you're really looking for, several components. I mean, obviously the bricks, the sugar levels, and the pH is going to be extremely important. And what your TA is, what your titratable acidity is, but also flavor development. And so that's the thing. It's like a finicky grape where, the bricks can just shoot up, and your pH is threatening dropping out of the bottom, but your flavor profile isn't quite there yet. So there's a lot of variables that take place until where you're like, okay, I think it's time. And so it usually comes in kind of later. It takes a while for it to ripen all the way. My very first vintage, I did not get fruit until Halloween Day, the 31st. Yeah, since that was insane. Very late. So, and it's always late. It's always the last to do everything. It's always the last to get picked. It's always the last to, and I think ultimately that's because I'm trying to. I mean, you can manipulate the numbers a little bit if you have to, but I try not to. I've always tried to never capitalize and add sugar. I've tried to not have to do acid additions. I mean, I'm really trying as much as possible to make the wine in the vineyard before I get the fruit. That's to me the best. And that's why my wine fluctuates a little bit, because I don't build a common denominator. I don't do any fining or filtering. My wine changes a little bit per vintage because that's what the year gave you. That's what we, and I think that's kind of, I mean, there's a lot of winemakers out there that I would say are more like wine sculptors. Like they're manipulating the wine to make a constant, product, which is going to be what the consumer expects. And there's a common thread with my wines, so it's not like I have drastically different profile in every vintage. There's always that common thread of old world, but there's slight changes. Some are a little lighter, some are a little bit heavier, some have a tiny bit more alcohol, some are very low. Just kind of depends on the vintage, but it really is made in the vineyard, and I think that's probably the most important part. But with that said, it's also, I don't inoculate for malolactic, and I know that's kind of a popular thing to do these days, but I think it's really important just to it's scary because your wine's not protected. Because if you put SO2, if you put sulfur dioxide into it, that's instantly going to kill your mallow. And so people are very afraid to just leave their wine exposed. But doing that, I think, really helps to contribute to the mouthfeel and the texture and what makes things to be a little bit more old world. So, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I finally had my 2022 finished mallow, and had no choice but in the heat of the day to rack all the barrels off and clean all the barrels out, get the lees out, get the dead yeast cells out, and clean the barrels and put it back in, and now they're happy, and they're just going to chill in the barrel for another year.
That happened in June?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So obviously you worked through production for a while. You had a number of mentors, a number of people helping you along the way. Tell me about the first time when it was your grapes and your name and your decisions. Tell me about making the decisions for your first vintage. Yeah, so as much as I love Dick Boucher, almost said Erath, Dick Boucher's fruit, I love the guy. Him and his wife, they're just such beautiful people and such hard workers, amazing farmers. Much respect, always. He really, though, has a lot more of I'd say a demand for like his Syrah and his Cab. And those are also definitely make him a higher premium, make more money. And so sometimes I wasn't able to totally control when I'd be able to get the fruit in a little bit. And so sometimes the bricks would be a little bit higher than I wanted them to be. Which means that
once in a while you have to. I mean, it's the nature of the business. Once in a while you have to add some more, JUs to the fermenters. What we call JUs, Jesus units, water. And and so sometimes I had to do that because the bricks were like 25 and a half and 26. So it wasn't until really 2018 that I got to work a lot more closely with Dan Thiessen and his spot is in Mission Hills, and it's really great fruit, and he was working with a different vineyard manager at the time, and I kind of told him like what I wanted, and then the 18 it came out nice, but I think that the vineyard manager left, and so he got a new guy that came in, and so then the 19 wasn't totally exactly where I wanted it, and then in 20 he found someone else, and to my knowledge that's the person that he's still working with now, and now they know exactly what I want. Now I can build contracts and say this is what I'd like, this is but it's always you're still dealing with an area which can sometimes have late frosts and wipe out 30% of the production, or have hailstorms come through, and so there's just a lot of Mother Nature variables that you can hope for what you can pray and hope for what you really want to get in the end, but sometimes that's not going to be necessarily exactly what you want. But with that said, it's nice now to. We're on the same page. He knows exactly what I'm trying to do, and they're trying to honor that and produce the very best possible fruit that they can, so that I can try to achieve my goals.
Talk about starting the label, about coming up with name and design, and starting to figure out how to sell it.
And this another person that I sold in Casaruno's book. His name is John Groshaw, and he has a wine called Coe Cellars GC. I don't know if you know John, but okay, yeah, he's a really good dude, and I love him. In early 2010, we were just going around. I think I took him out to the coast actually. At the time, my family, we had a beach house out in Pacific City, so that would be the stop-off point when I would finish my day, and then I could stay there and get up and come back to Portland. So that worked out pretty well. But I think we were on a trip together, and we were just visiting markets. We were, working the market together. And I said, I'm thinking about maybe getting into this a little bit. What do you What do you think? How did you do it? And so he told me, well, I pestered some friends and family and said, if you give me $100 or something, I'll give you a case of wine when it's done. And I'm like, that's genius. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna. So I completely, my first vintage was modeled 100% after John Groshaw, and so that's what I did. And in fact, that's because he did that. His very first wine was called his Cuvée des Amis, which is the wine of my friends, and that's why he paid homage to his friends and family. So that's what I did. And so then I had to come up with a label though, and I wanted it to be something cool, something that was similar to. I really wanted. I wanted to honor the grape because I love Sangiovese so much. I thought, well, maybe I will name it, have something to do with Sangiovese or something, or Jupiter. And so Jupiter is my favorite planet, but the problem is everything that has anything to do with Jupiter is already taken. It's already a winery or a brewery or something. I mean, even the major moons like Ganymede and Europa and Io and Callisto, they are all wineries. So, and I don't want to name my wine like 27A-6, which I think is one of the other moons. So I didn't know what to name it, and then I just thought, well, he's okay with his name on it. I guess maybe I could just use my name. So I just decided to go with Coe Cellars, and that's how it happened. And then the crest that's on my label is actually my family's crest, dating back to the 16th century in Sussex, England. And the earliest that we can go back, I guess, is a guy named John Coe, who went to Italy and fought in some wars in Italy, and was very successful, and came back to Sussex and ended up being granted knighthood, and was given a lot of land, and so I guess it was very prominent, and so he had his own crest, and his own family crest, and I just decided to use that because I thought it just gave the label an old school, kind of older world look, and so that's what I went with.
Always nice to have a family crest lying around for such situations like that.
Thanks, John.
Tell me about selling wine. Obviously, you had a lot of experience selling wine, but now you're selling your own wine. How is it different?
There's a lot of wine out there, and people only have so much room on their lists and stuff, and some accounts it doesn't make as much sense for. But as I touched on a little bit earlier, building those relationships over all those years, I think really was beneficial to being able to get my foot in the door to places and having them try it, and be like, rather than feel obligated because they know me, they try it and they're like, it's actually good. They're like, thank God. They're like, we would have had to come up with some terrible excuse to not get your wine if it sucked. But luckily it turned out that it is pretty good. People seem to like it, and so that's good for me. But yeah, it just it was hard, I think, with COVID. That really kind of interrupted the whole flow a little bit because it was so difficult. Most of my wine was being sold to restaurants, and obviously there wasn't a whole lot of restaurants happening during that time. So for a couple of years, that was a difficulty. I don't have a lot of retail presence, and retail was exploding, like before, like it's never been seen. Numbers like that were never been seen. So retail was going crazy, but I still had a bunch of loyal customers that I was still able to, especially out on the coast, from all those accounts that I serviced for 8 years, were really gracious and kept buying, even when they weren't sure if the restaurant was going to stay open or not.
Did you find that making Sangiovese specifically was an advantage in terms of kind of scarcity, or was it a disadvantage in terms of people not necessarily looking for Sangiovese in Oregon? Well,
I think that for some, Oregon, because of the fact that there's been so many, there were some laws that were passed back in the day to where, multiple distributors couldn't sell the same wine, right? And there was a lot of distributors that were wanting to bring in Italian stuff, and so all of a sudden the market became flooded with like Italian wine. And to this day, Portland sells more Italian wine. Actually, it's insane the amount of Italian wine that's sold per capita. The only city in the entire United States that sells more Italian wine per capita is New York. Portland is number 2. So there's like a real demand for Italian wine in the metro area, and I think people get it. I think they have a little bit more refined palates, I think, in this area, because it is a wine growing, viticultural area, and people love the Pinot, and people. But people also at the same time really love wines that are really good with food, and Sangiovese is like one of those grapes. It's like one of those wines that's just, it makes makes the food better. The food makes the wine better. It's just the true definition of the marriage of the two.
You mentioned obviously COVID and the pandemic. What were the kind of your kind of initial reactions during 2020 as you were kind of figuring out what to do with your brand, and how have you sort of come out the other side of that?
Well, I mean, for a while there was just a lot of uncertainty. I mean, but at the same time, I kind of thought, well, the chances of this. I mean, I guess I was kind of like looking at the 1918, bird flu, or the Spanish flu rather. I was looking at those stats and seeing like, how long that kind of lived out, and that was basically about 3 years. And it seemed like this was like a relatively like similar situation virus-wise and mortality-wise. So I figured keep doing it, because if I was to take a break and not make a wine for a vintage, it would really hurt, because they would break that financial cycle, and then it'd almost just be like starting over again. But I figured that there would be a demand, that it would end, and the demand would be there. So just keep doing it, keep making it. So I borrowed money and did what I had to do to keep doing it. Knowing that the demand would be there once we finally came out of the lockdown. But there was some uncertainty there for a while, for sure. The first year was very surreal, just crazy.
With your unique perspective, how have you seen the restaurant scene come back from COVID?
Well, I mean, the city lost a lot of restaurants. A lot of the really great ones didn't make it. And so I think we're still seeing like that evolution. It's just going to take some time to see as the dust kind of settles. I think that with the riots and everything that was going on, and the pandemic, like it was just downtown just got really hit really hard, and it still is. It's still recovering. I mean, it's pretty awful in some places, but you can see signs of like, people putting their storefront out there, getting, even opening up a new place, and just trying to make the effort to keep the scene going. And I think that we have such a heritage here for amazing food. Having James Beard growing up in Gearhart and teaching at Reed College, and just all the fantastic restaurants that we do have. A lot of them held on, and a lot of them were able to make it, and so I think we're seeing we're seeing things rise from the ashes, and I think the future is hopeful.
You mentioned earlier that you've kind of had a shift in terms of kind of going all in towards the brand. So tell me about how that realization has sort of played out for you so far as you're trying to ramp up production, and how you're seeing the next year or so play out for yourself. Well,
that's a great question. I guess it's to be determined a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful. I think that the demand's going to be there for sure. But I know that I want to commit to this. I want to commit to upping my production. I think it's, after just having it be kind of like a side hustle for so many years, that it's really, really time to just do it full time. I mean, it's just, there's a demand for it. I sell out of everything every single year. I think that this is definitely the direction that the universe is pointing me. So I'm just gonna go in with an open heart and hope that when the time comes, because I will have a lot more wine, that I can just build more accounts. I'll have to start going in places that I don't know and that I don't have relationships with. And slowly restart to build new relationships, and as a new generation of entrepreneurs and restaurateurs make a go of their hopes and dreams.
What else are you looking ahead to for the future, for your future, or for the future of the brand?
I would like to definitely expand things a little bit. I started actually in 2019 making a new wine, and so you're probably familiar with this, but there's a lot of people that aren't. But there is a wine in Tuscany called a Super Tuscan, and so a Super Tuscan is well, there's several variables there, but basically for the most part, it started back in the 70s with like Antinori, and those guys made a wine called Antiniello, and the Antiniello was like a blend of Sangiovese and Cabernet. So the government, in order to, you'll see stickers on Italian, bottles that they'll say the DOC, which is a government, guaranteeing that it's from this spot, and even a step further, a DOCG, which is the 100%. This is from this site. But if you ever change like the varietals that you use, or the amount of oak that it sees, or how long it's in barrels, or anything that steps out of the guidelines that they set, then it has to be just a regular table wine, like they call it IGT. So they coined the term Super Tuscan. Mostly, I think it was to cater to a Western palate that typically gravitated towards a bigger, heavier wine. And so that's where it was born. And I decided I wanted to kind of like build my, portfolio a little bit, have something else to offer. So I have my regular Sangiovese, and now I'm making this super, well, it's really a Super Washington. But I've got, I picked my favorite barrel of Sangiovese, and then I made cab for the first time, which was a whole different animal, which was kind of fun though. And so yeah, I blended it, and my 19 I only sell it out of the tasting room. I only made 2 barrels. I made 50 cases, so it's a very, very small amount. But I bought more last year, so I have a lot more cab. I also bought Cab Franc, and I bought Petit Verdot. So I made all these new varietals that I've never made before. So there's new things coming out. I'm excited to maybe do a white as well. I would like to try to work with some Italian white like Arnese or Vermentino or Favorita or something, because I want to offer more in our tasting room than just like one wine. Especially as I look towards the future of trying to build up a wine club, and I think it's always going to be important to sell wine to restaurants and to wine shops, and I'll always keep doing that. But the DTC, the direct-to-consumer sales, is really where it's at. That's how these wineries build, $12 million tasting rooms, is because they're selling direct to these people. And they're cutting out the middlemen, and they're making all the money, and that's the best margin, of course. But yeah, so I'm hopefully going to have a little bit. I did try making rosé in 2019, and it wasn't very successful. I'd never done it before, and it was for the wrong reasons. Because typically, if you're going to make pretty good rosé, like really good rosé, you want to go out and pick it a little early when the bricks are lower and the acid's higher. But our destemmer was not behaving well, and it was kicking out a ton of fruit out the back of it, which is not good. That's just so much money lost. And so I actually collected it, and I put it in the bladder, I put it in the press, and I just pressed it off and made a rosé with it. But it was just too, it didn't have enough acid, and I didn't release it commercially. But that was 2019, and my last name is Coe. So I only made like maybe 40 cases of it. My friends drank most of it. But ones that I did give away as presents, just for people to have, I just hand wrote on the bottles COVID-19. And but I'm not sure if the TTB would approve that.
They don't generally have a great sense of humor for labels, I've noticed, but that's pretty good. You mentioned all those new varietals. Tell me about learning to work with new grapes. Did you feel fairly confident dealing with sort of the different styles?
Yeah, because the guy I work with at a dig Northwest, his name's Bradford Cowan, and he's really great. He's very talented winemaker. I've learned a lot from him, being with him over the years too, and he has a Solera system. He has like I think is probably the biggest. His port is insane. He has the biggest Solera system on the entire West Coast, as far as I know. So he's got some really great ports that he's getting ready to come out with. But he just, he focuses. He makes like Cab and Cab Franc and Petit Verdot, and he makes a lot of different kinds of wines, both Rhone Valley stuff and Bordeaux style stuff. So just kind of watching him do it over the years and seeing like what kind of techniques like he would do with his, and bleeding off some of the like Saunier, like bleeding off some stuff to concentrate the skin's ratio versus the must and things like that. So yeah, it was kind of fun to watch him. It was a different animal to actually do it myself. But I tend to gravitate towards like trying to let things go natural yeast fermentation. I really prefer that. And you don't really know what that means. I mean, yeah, there could be some yeast that comes in off of the vineyard, but your forklift might have inoculated your vintage that year, whatever yeast is on, So a lot of times my stuff, there's other people in the space and they've got active fermentations going on, so that will also inoculate fermenters. And that's actually kind of interesting. I never really too much thought about it, but I think part of the reason that my wine has like a little bit of a lighter, kind of lifted, brighter kind of aspect to it is those early vintages that I made at Holleran with Mark Lagasse. Since I mentioned earlier that my Sangiovese was always last, their fermenters, their Pinot fermenters were going crazy, and so my Sangiovese was getting inoculated with Pinot Noir, which was kind of interesting. And so maybe there's a reason why that gave it a little bit of that aspect. But anyway, typically, yeah, like I said, let it go through natural yeast fermentation. There have been times though where a fermenter will get too funky, and so then I will hit it with like a yeast strain. But most of the time my fermenters go wild. But the Sangiovese that I have is actually the clone is Sangiovese Grosso, so it's the same exact clone that they use to make Brunello. And so I will use like BM45 or something that's specifically designed for Brunello. If a fermenter starts to get too funky, then I need to kick it back. If it's giving off like too much EA or any kind of volatile acidity stuff, I'll definitely hit it. Want to try to stay within threshold and not make something too funky.
How have you seen, kind of broadening out a little bit here, how have you seen the Oregon wine industry sort of grow and change in the time you've been involved with it or aware of it?
Well, it's just amazing having people like David Lett and grow, starting in 1966, and then you got people coming in like Dick Erath and Ponzi and all those guys. I mean, they really put the stuff on the map, and then of course, the winning all those awards in France and everything, and just it's really fun. It's cool to have the notoriety that this is like one of the best places in the world to make wine, and specifically Pinot Noir. So that's been great, but it's been really nice to see like how many more younger people have been getting involved and seeing their take on wines. And I know there's been like a big natural wine movement and stuff. That's been going on for a while as well. But I just think that having the foundation of such a great iconic place to make wine, and using that as a foundation to expand and blossom and try different things and try out different styles and techniques and varietals. I think the world is being really receptive to that, because I think we've earned a spot in as being very respected. That we're not just like, we're not. I think for a long time we were thought of as back in the 70s for sure, 60s, 70s, as a lesser, inferior sort of growing area, but that's just not true anymore. And I think the world's ready to embrace all the wines that we're making.
So what comes next for the industry? Where do you see it going from here?
I would like to see, for sure, a younger generation getting into wine and appreciating wine. It seems like it kind of oscillates a little bit, and and now with marijuana being legalized, it's I don't know. People have sort of this a certain amount of money, this like pie that they can put towards beer or wine or marijuana or blah blah blah. So there's just a certain amount of money for that, and so it all impacts the industry. But I would like to definitely see people appreciate the marriage of food and wine, and have younger people get into wine and really appreciate it, because that's the only thing that's going to keep the industry moving forward.
All right, that's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything that we didn't cover here today that you'd like to cover?
No, I think that's pretty good. I think we talked about a lot of stuff. I'm honored. Thank you to be part of this, and I really appreciate you guys' help and time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future regarding my brand, and to look back on this in 10 years from now and see what I've got going on. I think that the ride will be fun, and it'll be exciting to look back at the old footage and see what happens, because there's a lot going on. I mean, with the climate change, and I know people are I know some winemakers are looking around, areas around Seattle to grow Pinot Noir, and Canada, and so there's a lot of variables. There's lots happening with global warming, and climate change is going to become a major issue. So hopefully, maybe winemaking will be one of the facets that helps people realize, we need to do something, and do it now to protect our future. Because I don't want to have our grandkids be tending Tempranillo vines at the Arctic Circle. So, let's take care of the planet.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your kind words there. We appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us and make the trip out here, and we'll let you off the hook.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys.